Good morning. We will start with provision for bad debts today. The first year that we create a provision, it means that we make provision that people will not pay us in the future and that the business will lose some of the money because they will not receive this money from them. If we look at the information here, we have a balance in the debtors control of 32,400 and we have a balance in the bad debts account of 980. That means during this year, ended the 30th of April, we've already written off 980 rand. Then we decide to create a provision for bad debts or allowance for credit losses of 1,100. Debtors is a positive asset. We want to reduce the asset with the amount that we will not receive in the future, so we have to create a negative asset. This debtors control and this provision for bad debts is actually one account. The debtors control is the debit side of the account, and the provision for bad debts, my negative asset, will reduce my debtors, and therefore the provision will always have a credit balance. So if we create a provision the first year, we will create an expense account to show from the current year's income we will reduce with 1,100, so our profits will reduce with 1,100. And we will create that provision and credit the provision for bad debts account. If we go to the income statement, we will show that there's an expense of 1,100 for the current year. And in the balance sheet, we will not record our debtors as 32,400. We will say 32,400 minus the possibility that we're going to lose 1,100 in the future. So the amount that we know we will definitely get in the future is 31,300. And we will show the 31,300 as an asset in my balance sheet. What did we learn today? When the provision for bad debts is created, the provision for bad debts adjustment account will be debited to create an expense, and the provision for bad debts will be credited to create a negative asset. The debtors control is my positive asset and the provision for bad debt is my negative asset. In the balance sheet, the current assets for debtors and other receivables will be shown in the following way. Debtors control 32,400 minus the provision for bad debt. So the asset that will be recorded in the balance sheet will be 31,300. And the provision for bad debts adjustment will be shown as an expense in my income statement to reduce my profits for the year. At the end of April 2014, that means a year later, the debtors control have a balance of 28,400. The provision for bad debts that was created at the end of the previous year was 1,100. So we have this balance in the provision for bad debts account from the end of the previous year. We never write in this provision for bad debts account except at the end of the financial year when this amount is adjusted. So it can either be increased or decreased. So we will look at our debtors at the end of April 2014 and decide how many of this 28,400 is a possibility that we will not get in the future. And then we decide that we must adjust this provision to 1,000 rand. That means I want to change this balance of 1,100 to the new balance that I will carry over to the next financial year of 1,000 rand. Because I want to decrease the balance from 1,100 to 1,000, I will have to debit my provision for bad debts account to decrease to the new balance. And my provision for bad debts adjustment will then have to be credited with 100. So that means in the year that we reduce the provision for bad debts, the movement between the previous year, the 1,100, and the current year, 1,000, will be an income for the business. And that means this will go to your profit and loss account on the credit side and will increase your profits. We therefore always have to look at the provision for bad debts account before we can decide whether the provision for bad debts adjustment will be debited or credited. If I want to increase the provision for bad debts, then it means that I will debit the provision for bad debts adjustment, then I will create an expense. If I want to reduce the provision for bad debts, I have to debit it, then I will credit the provision for bad debts adjustment, and therefore I will create an income. What did we learn today? When the provision for bad debts is adjusted, the provision for bad debts is debited to reduce the negative asset, and the provision for bad debts adjustment will then be increased on the credit side to create an income. If we increase the provision for bad debts, the provision for bad debts will be credited and the adjustment will be debited, and that means we will create an expense. The debtors control is my positive asset. The provision for bad debts is my negative asset. In the balance sheet, the current asset for debtors and other receivables will be shown in the following way. I will show that the debtors owe 28,400 and that the provision for bad debts is 1,000 rand. So that means the total amount that I should receive in the future is 27,400. Because we reduced the provision for bad debts, we debited the provision for bad debts, credited the adjustment account, so we created an income. So in the income statement, we will show this income that will increase my profits. Provision for bad debts adjustment 100. So the total amount, the balance, new balance in your provision for bad debts account will be recorded in the balance sheet where it is deducted from your debtors. The provision for bad debts adjustment account, that is just the movement between the previous year and the current year, will be shown in the income statement either as an income or an expense. At the end of the following year, the debtors balance will be 38,400. The provision for bad debts is 1,000. That is the amount that we left in our books at the end of the previous year. We never record any entry in the provision for bad debts account except at the end of the financial year. The provision for bad debts must be adjusted to 1,400. At the moment, the balance is 1,000 rand. So if we want to increase it to 1,400, we have to record 400 on the credit side so that the new balance will be 1,400 rand. If we credit the provision for bad debt with 400, then it means that we will debit the provision for bad debts adjustment with 400, and that means that we have an expense of 400. So when we increase the provision for bad debts, the adjustment account will be debited and we create an expense. If the provision for bad debts account is reduced, you will debit the provision for bad debts account and you will credit the adjustment account, and that will then be recorded as an income. In this case, the debtors control is 38,400. The new balance that we created now in this provision for bad debts account is 1,400. So the amount that I will receive in the future is 34,000. Because we reduced the provision for bad debts, we created an expense of 400 Rand.